Lately, we've been doing a lot of construction progress, photo and video work, among many other things, and the ability to pre-program and save flight missions for reuse is a great feature to have. For example, being able to take photos from the same location or altitude or vantage point on a construction site over the course of construction. Having the ability to create waypoint missions and save flight plans for reuse also opens up the door for a lot of creative uses as well. A mission that might have been hard to fly, if not impossible, manually, now becomes more reasonable using pre-programmed or automated flights using waypoints. Think of it as an autopilot for your drone. And though construction is a great example of how valuable waypoints and saved flight missions can be, we've also used programmed flight on video projects as well to replicate shots to get them to match as closely as possible. Unlike previous DJI drones like the Phantom 4 Pro or Mavic 2, which had an SDK or software development kit released so that those platforms could be used with third-party apps and vendors such as Litchi and Autopilot, the Mavic 3 did not have an SDK released, which means we could only use apps like Litchi or Autopilot with older drones such as the Phantom 4 Pro or the Mavic 2. So any work that we were going to use where we'd like to replicate those flights, we're going to have to be used with the Phantom 4 or Mavic 2 series aircraft. We were not going to be able to use the new Mavic 3. That is until recently. On December 9th, DJI released new firmware for the Mavic 3 series of drones. One of the biggest features of this firmware is the addition of waypoint flights, among a few other things. In order to use these features, you must be on the most current firmware on all of your devices. So how do waypoints work? Well, there's two different methods for creating a waypoint mission. The first method is where you'd have to have the drone powered and you are manually flying the drone to the locations where you want your waypoint set. I've made a little example video and let's watch that now. Okay, so we're at one of the local parks here nearby, and we're going to do some of the waypoint missions here just as an example. So there's two methods to create a waypoint mission. The first method is by flying the mission manually first and setting your waypoints as you fly. So if we click on the little squiggly line to the left of the screen right here, that's going to open up our waypoint mission menu. As you can see, we've got a couple options here. We've got waypoint and we've got POI, which is point of interest. We're going to do a simple one here, just a simple waypoint mission with a few waypoints just to show you how that works. So let's say we wanted to start our mission where we're at here. There's a couple ways that you can add a waypoint. You can either click the little plus button at the bottom that adds your waypoint, or you can push, as it says there in the menu, press the C1 button to add the waypoint. And if you press that, you can see on the map here under our aircraft that it added a waypoint. So that's going to be our first waypoint. Now if we fly to our second position, and let's say we wanted to come up over here and we're going to rise up. And as we do, we want to keep the pond as our focus point. So we're tilting the gimbal down to keep the pond in view here. As you can see, we're about 17 degrees gimbal pitch. So we're going to add another waypoint. Again, you can push the plus sign at the bottom, or you can push the C1 button. When we do that, if we look at the waypoint 2, it has taken all of that data and put that into that waypoint. So our altitude is 144.64 feet. Our heading is 137.4. Our gimbal tilt is -16.5. So it saved all of that data. So when it gets to this waypoint, we should see exactly that, what we're seeing on the screen. Let's go over a little bit more here. We'll pan to the right, and we will yaw the camera to the left. Again, keeping the pond in view, and actually just for demonstration purposes, we'll tilt the gimbal back up just a little bit here to, let's say, negative 14 degrees. Now, if I hit the C1 button, that gave us our waypoint number 3. And again, if we go in here, we can see all the settings have been saved for this waypoint. Now, you can go into each individual waypoint and still tweak these settings as you would like. So if at waypoint 1 we wanted a different gimbal tilt, we can change that in the settings here. Or if we wanted a different heading, if we wanted a different speed for any individual waypoint. Right now, all of these waypoints are following our global speed. So the speed is set for all waypoints in the global setting, which is our 3 dots here to the right menu under the global settings. That's our global speed. If we toggle that, move the slider up and down, you can see the global speed is changing as well. We can also specify in these global settings what we want the drone to do at the end of the flight. Do we want it to just hover? Do we want it to return home? Do we want it to land or go back to the starting point? We're going to say to just leave it hover. We also have settings for lost signal. What do we want the drone to do if the signal's lost during the mission? Do we want it to return home? Do we want it to hover? Do we want it to land? Or do we want it to just continue the mission to the end? For our purposes here, we're going to say just return to home if we lose signal. And then we also have, for our waypoints, which waypoint do we want this mission to start from? In this case, we're going to start from waypoint 1, but you could choose to start the mission from any of your waypoints that have been set. So these are your global settings down here. And again, that's under the 3 dots right here, the menu to the right of the main waypoint settings menu. Like I mentioned, you can go into any one of these waypoints and you can tweak or change these settings in here. Now, one that I think is interesting is the zoom. So we actually have the option to zoom the camera at any of these waypoints. So let's, even though we've already set our waypoints on, let's say waypoint number 2, let's say we want to add a little zoom to waypoint 2. What we're going to do, and I've not tried this yet, so it'll be interesting to see how this works. So we added 1.4 times zoom at waypoint 2. And then waypoint 3, we're back to 1 times zoom. So we should zoom in. Once we get to waypoint 2, we should be at 1.4 times zoom. And as we go to waypoint 3, that zoom should come off and go back to 1 times zoom. So that should be interesting to see. Once we have all of our settings set, again, this is a very simple waypoint mission, but once we're ready, we're going to hit the next button. Actually, one other thing I want to show you. When we get to waypoint number 1, we do have these camera actions. Right now it's set to none, but we can tell the drone to start doing something at waypoint number 1. We can tell it to take a photo, we could tell it to start a recording or stop recording. So at waypoint 1, we're going to tell it to start recording. And then at waypoint number 3, we are going to tell it to stop the recording. And to double check that, waypoint 1 is starting the recording. Waypoint number 3 is stopping the recording. So now when we get to waypoint 1, the drone should start the camera recording. Once we get to waypoint 3, it should stop. So this should be pretty interesting. We're going to hit next. This goes to review everything you have set. At the end of the flight, we're just going to hover. Again, we can still change those settings in here if we wanted to change something. But we're going to have it just hover. Looks all good. I'm going to hit go. And now that waypoint mission has been uploaded to the drone, and it's going back to waypoint 1, which we told it to start from. And it's going to, it should, once it gets there, it should start the camera recording until we get to waypoint number 3. And it is a pretty lousy day here, so things are a little bit dark. Dark and dreary. All right, so here the drone is turning around. We've gotten to waypoint number 1. So this was our waypoint 1. There's our gimbal tilt, and the camera has started recording. Now we should see in just a second, there it goes. The drone is now making its way to our waypoint 2. And as you can see, as it does so, the gimbal tilt is actually operating all on its own. The drone is actually flying and doing everything on its own right now. And actually there goes our zoom as well. So we're at 1.3 times zoom. And now our zoom is backing off as we go to waypoint number 3. And our tilt is actually coming back up again as well. So the drone did that flight all on its own based upon what we put into it for the parameters. There's our waypoint number 3, and it stopped recording. So as you can see, the drone did that whole mission by itself and was very smooth and methodical in the way that it did everything. Some of these types of shots could be very hard to do if you're trying to zoom in while panning to the right and yawing to the left and all these different things. It could be hard to do as a human trying to make all these inputs and get a smooth shot out of it all. So that's our first demonstration, just with 3 simple waypoints and what you can do with this thing. All right, so we did a simple waypoint mission. Now, what is point of interest? Point of interest would be where we want the camera to be pointing. That is our point of interest while our waypoint mission is running. So for example, if we set up our waypoints, and let's do something fairly, again, quick and easy. We're going to add some waypoints here. There's 1. And then let's say we fly over here. We'll gain some altitude. And here is waypoint 2. Hit the plus icon. We'll gain some altitude, and we'll go out a little bit further. And we'll say this is waypoint number 3. Okay, but let's say while we were flying these waypoints that we wanted the drone to, again, be focused on the lake the entire time, or the pond the entire time. If we're flying this and manually inputting all of this stuff, in other words, we're not pre-planning this mission, we have to fly the drone to where our point of interest would be. So we go to point of interest here, and we would have to fly over, we'd have to fly over the pond. Once we're over the pond, and we're looking straight down here to see where our waypoint or our point of interest would be. Once we're over where we want our point of interest to be, we hit the plus sign again, and now that added our point of interest, as you can see on the map. So our waypoints you can see in the green off to the left, and our point of interest is over the pond. And if I back up here just a bit, you can see that that is that little red icon in the middle of the pond. If you look at our waypoints, you can see the little green arrow on each one. Point number 1 is actually looking at our point of interest. Waypoint 2, though, is not quite looking at our point of interest. And then waypoint 3 is looking more to the south or bottom of our map. So what we would do is we would go into our waypoints, and on waypoint 1, we are going to tell the drone that we want to face our point of interest. It says aircraft heading and gimbal tilt at selected waypoint will be automatically adjusted to face the point of interest. Continue, we say OK. We need to do the same thing for waypoint number 2. So at waypoint number 2, if we click on the heading, it says 172, we go to custom, we say face point of interest, and you can see the arrow is now pointing directly at our point of interest. And we'll do the same thing for waypoint number 3. The heading is 174.3. Again, we hit custom and we say face point of interest. Okay. And now if you look, we can see that all of our waypoints are now looking at, or the camera will be pointed at our point of interest. Now, if we go to our point of interest that we set, you can see that our altitude for the point of interest is 180 feet above the ground. Now, our camera is going to be focused at 180 feet above the ground, so that's not really what we want. We're going to have to lower the altitude on this to get down to where the pond would be. So I would lower it to maybe somewhere around, we'll say 10 feet. And we can see a link waypoint. We've got all of our waypoints set to focus on the point of interest. So now that we have that all set, we go into our global settings. We're going to change the speed here, bump it up just a little bit to, let's say, about 11 and a half miles per hour. Into the flight, we want to just hover. If our signal's lost, we're going to return to home, and our start point is waypoint 1. So we're going to hit, actually, let's do the recording. So at waypoint 1, camera action is going to be start recording, and at waypoint 3, our camera action will be stop recording. Now that we have that all set, we're going to hit next, go back to our camera view, and we're going to hit go. So now the drone, as you can see on the map, we are heading over to our first waypoint. And once we get there, the camera should look at our point of interest and the drone should start recording. So there we started recording, and the drone is using the pond as its point of interest. As you can see, the drone is yawing and the gimbal is tilting as well to stay on that point of interest. Now, if I would have left that altitude at 180 feet, the drone would be looking almost straight level with where the drone is. The camera would be, so we'd be looking way above where the pond is. But since we lowered it, the camera is keeping its point of interest more on the pond, if that makes sense. So again, we hit waypoint number 3, and there our recording has stopped. So those are a couple ways of how you can set up waypoint missions while flying the drone. The weather's getting pretty crummy here, and let's take a look at how we could pre-program these flights without having the drone powered. So as you can see, this method of creating a waypoint mission while flying the drone can be a little bit cumbersome, and you're also wasting a lot of valuable battery time while you're flying around setting all your waypoints before you even get to fly the mission. So let's look at a way that we can pre-program these waypoint missions before even powering the drone on or going out to the site using the DJI Fly app. We need to get into the camera view. So if you open up the app without being connected to the drone, you'll have to click on the connection guide and then the camera view in the upper right corner of the screen. As you can see, we're not connected to the aircraft, but we still have the menu for creating our waypoint mission on the left side of the screen as we did before. If we open that up and we open our map, we have to zoom into the area that we want to create this waypoint mission at. I'm going to zoom into the same area that we were at for the previous example. All right, now that we're here, you can see we have the same menu at the bottom, waypoint and point of interest. We can no longer just tap on the plus button. It's not even an option anymore. And that is because the drone is not in a position that we can set that as a waypoint. Instead, what we have to do is we have to tap on the screen, and that sets our waypoints. Now that we have our waypoints set, you can see that the altitude has defaulted to 164 feet for each waypoint. And this is because the drone, again, is not flying and providing this data to these waypoints as we set them. So instead what we have to do is go in and set these altitudes where we would like them to be. So let's say that at waypoint 1 we would want a lower altitude. We would go to the altitude button and use the slider to dial in what altitude we would like to start at. We can do the same thing for the other waypoints and set individual altitudes for each one. In our first example, we had waypoint 1 start the recording. We can do the same thing in here. Tap on the camera action, scroll over to start record, and it's selected. If we go over to waypoint 3, we can then tell the camera action to stop recording. So you can customize all these different settings for each waypoint as we did in the first example. If we wanted to change the altitude for all the waypoints, we can simply select one of the waypoints, set what we would want our altitude to be, and then hit apply to all. This says apply current settings to all waypoints. We say OK, and now you can see our altitude has now been applied across all of the waypoints. Another great feature that was added is the ability to save these waypoint missions. You can do this by clicking the little white icon, which opens up the history and save option. If I tap that, it says save current waypoint flight. We can hit save, and then we can click on the edit icon, and we can actually give it a name. This will allow us to pull up this saved waypoint mission once we get to the site where we intend to fly. Once the missions have been saved, you can easily pull them back up by going into the Waypoint Missions menu and tapping on the white missions icon and selecting your saved mission that you would like to fly. This will load your mission, and you can still go in and make adjustments to the individual waypoints if you still need to do so before flying the mission. And that's it. You now know the two methods for creating waypoint missions and being able to save them through the DJI Fly app and the new firmware. If you got anything out of this video, we appreciate a thumbs up or even give us a follow. And until next time, happy and safe flying.